evening, Grace America. I am Hugh Hewitt in Studio West, the Relief Factor studio out on the left coast, where I'll be while I teach this semester. And I've moved to the afternoon, 3 to 6 drive time in the east, noon to 3 in the west. So pleased to welcome back Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired from the United States Navy. He's with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, and he is the go-to guy. Good morning, Admiral. Good afternoon, Admiral. I got to get rid of my old hiccups there. Good afternoon. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Hugh, and thank you very much for having me today.
Well, I've been talking about confirmations for Pete Hegseth and for Tulsi Gabbard with Senator Thune and Senator Cotton today. I thought I'd look beyond that with you, Admiral, and talk about what should they do, the national security team do when they are actually confirmed. And I want to talk to you primarily about ships, submarines, submersibles, satellites, and cybersecurity. You go first. What ought to be our priority for the new Congress?
So first, and I want to throw Kristi Noem in too as well at Homeland, because Homeland
Yes.
is part of national security. So look, I think every president has stated in some form of another that defending the homeland is their number one priority. I mean, President Trump in his 2017 national security strategy said, "My first responsibility is to protect the American people and the American homeland." You know, and he's coming to office 8 years later, and he will be disappointed to find that the homeland has never been less secure. And the problem extends beyond the the border issue, one that he has been publicly discussing very effectively. President Trump now faces serious long-range missile and cyber threats emanating from both China and Russia that need to be addressed. So for me, I'm a Navy guy. I have a whole argument on power projection in the Navy and the Air Force, but I'm going to start by saying address the threat to the homeland.
Well, where do we do that? It's such a big problem because the border has been open. The Chi-Coms have developed hypersonics. The Russians are aggressive where do you begin, Admiral? If you get a call from Mike Waltz over at the NSC and he says, "Where do I begin?" What do you suggest to him?
So my first call would be about cybersecurity. The revelations about over the past year about the depth of Chinese cyber penetrations into U.S. critical infrastructure should remove any doubt about Beijing's intentions to unseat us as the preeminent global power. This process called Volt Typhoon, which is the Chinese penetration of select U.S. critical infrastructures, ports, rail systems, power grids. It's effectively what I, as a military officer, would call operational preparation of the battlefild. They're installing malicious code that Beijing can activate during a crisis to disrupt the U.S. economy. In Russia and Iran are doing the same thing. America will not be able to rapidly mobilize its military forces if its rail, aviation, and port systems that move military equipment, personnel, and supplies to the battlefield are inoperable. So the first thing I do is get in there and understand, how do I improve this public-private partnership to get those rail systems going? What do I have to do to get the right standards of cybersecurity and the aviation and the port systems so that the military, first and foremost, so the military can move its gear, but second, so that we can continue our great economic productivity during a crisis, so we can use our real power, our economic power, to bring China to heel.
Let me play for our audience, Admiral Montgomery, a clip of Director Wray, the FBI outgoing director, on 60 Minutes this weekend, cut number 6. You just said, that's what the FBI director said. What do they do? I mean, do we build a new alternative redundant cyber system for our infrastructure? How do we remedy the problem?
If only we had that sort of budget, Hugh. We can't build a new system. What we have to do is, and it's still expensive, but we have to go in and install cyber resilience in our key critical infrastructures. First of all, prioritize. One thing the Biden administration could never do was prioritize. So what you have to do is say, these are the 500 things that are most important to me. It might be these 7 power systems, these 4 rail systems, these 6 ports, these 10 air operating authorities, big airports. Prioritize. It's hard. I don't know why, but the Biden administration just would not do it. I'd prioritize, get my several hundred number one top priorities, and then I would go work with those companies and say, look, I'm going to give you benefits. I'm going to give you improved intelligence. I'm going to give you improved threat information. I'm going to work with you, give you third-party assessment checks. but the burden is you're going to have the high level security that's necessary to, if not defeat the Chinese, be able to rapidly recover after an attack. This is a complex thing, Hugh. It took us 25 years of not paying enough attention to this problem to get in this hole. It's going to take us a few years to get out, but President Biden can do it. And the initial, having Mike Waltz as your national security advisor, to me, is the first strong sign that you're committed to this kind of defense of the homeland.
So, Admiral, explain to me, you ran the cyber solarium with our friend of the program, Congressman Gallagher, and Angus King, Senator from Maine, Congressman Gallagher from Wisconsin, now retired. Would you approach, let's say, Southern California Edison and say to them, we have to debug your system? Because I do think it sounds like a roto-rooter of our entire electronic infrastructure is necessary. I don't know who's going to have the time to do it, but when you leave a problem unchecked for 25 years, you end up with the California fire problem, which we're living through right now, which is the collapse effect of 25 years of negligence.
Hugh, you got it just right. That same lack of commitment to critical infrastructure that you see in Southern California perpetuates throughout large portions of our critical infrastructures below the big banks. I'm gonna give them credit. The big banks, each big bank spends about $1 billion a year on cybersecurity. They do that because 25 years ago they were getting robbed, and that hit their bottom line, so they began investing. That you can see what right looks like in America, and it's at very big banks. They still get hit like Wells Fargo and things, but they recover rapidly and they protect our money. So I'll just tell you, we know what right looks like. We've got to work with these companies. We can't boil the ocean though. It can't be every company everywhere all at once. We've got to get the priorities right and work on those. There are smart people on this. There's a man named Tom Fanning who was on the commission with us, CEO of Southern Company, who I think could come in the administration, make a big input on this. There are people that can help Mike Waltz get this done. But it starts with leadership at the top, with the president, the national security advisor, and then when he gets Kristi Noem in and Pete Hegseth in, with those cabinet secretaries leading.
Now, Admiral, if you're driving home right now in the East, or you're listening out on your lunchtime in the West, I was, before COVID, this studio was in fact taken hostage by cyber bandits, and we refused to deal with them. So we just lost all of our programs for many years, and then we installed a redundant system so that it would never happen again. And I learned from rough experience what it's like to be hacked and to be held hostage, your data. Do you think the average business person driving home knows what to do at their home company, at their home office, with their utility, if they're a public utility official?
So you described it perfectly. I know when they do know, if it's happened to them already. If they've had the experience you've had, they make the investments. It is the enlightened leader that makes the investment before the crisis. And that's what we're trying to do now, is we're trying to enlighten these leaders. And look, if I was running a small, medium-sized business, I know that my float, like how long I can operate after a ransomware attack, is 4 to 6 weeks. So I can't suffer an extended ransomware attack that I can't recover from rapidly. So I need to it is in my bottom line interest to make the investments in cybersecurity. That won't be China or Russia, the small, medium-sized business. That'll be a criminal actor like probably hit you. My point on this is it takes enlightened leadership to make those investments left of boom. I think we're all smart enough to make the investment right of boom.
Let's talk a little bit then about missile defense, because it's a subject that's been a favorite of the show for a quarter century, and nobody really takes it seriously. Even 25 years after Reagan was proven right, nobody takes it seriously, even after Iron Dome, even after David Sling. What's the country got to do there, Admiral Montgomery?
So, same issue here. We've been watching Russia and China build up these systems over 2 decades, and we really haven't made the investments necessary in the homeland defense. This doesn't mean our ships can't defend themselves. We're seeing that every day in the Red Sea. I think the Navy's up to about 200 intercepts of cruise and ballistic missiles and drones in the Red Sea. But we have not made the investments in making sure that in the mainland that we can detect, track, and engage long-range cruise and hypersonic missiles.
Admiral, I've got to break away on the television side. Stay with me for a second so I can talk to you for a little bit longer. So I'm back with Admiral Mark Montgomery, retired United States Navy, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. We're talking about cyber defense and missile defense. Admiral, I wanted to ask you specifically about Homeland Security. What role do they have to play in missile defense of the homeland? When Kristi Noem walks in, I'm sure she's going to look at these California fires and at the border and all that kind of stuff. We know those problems, but who owns missile defense? Is that purely the Pentagon, or is it both agencies?
So first, I would tell you that she does own those fires, and that's going to be a tough recovery. But she owns the cyber more than the Department of Defense. She's supporting the Department of Defense, but she owns that mission in my mind. The missile defense mission, though, it's going to be owned by Pete Hegseth, and he'll be disappointed when he gets his first brief, because we really have not assigned the proper authorities and budget to the U.S. Northern Command commander, so commonly known as NORTHCOM. That officer usually works closely with Homeland Security, but he has a secondary responsibility for the defense of the United States against missile attack. But we don't have, as we saw with the balloon 2 years ago, as it drifted, as we were slow to detect it, slow to report it, slow to take action on it. So eventually I had to drift across the whole country before we shot it down over the East Coast instead of over the Alaska coast, as we should have. We're not ready for this. And China and Russia are building hypersonic missiles, long-range cruise missiles that will be able to directly impact the United States, and we won't be able to identify them, track them, or engage them without a significant investment. So this one sits solely with the Secretary of Defense.
Let me give you the hard choice, just in the sort of terms that I think Donald Trump thinks in and Hugh Hewitt thinks in. Look, I can give you 3 Virginia-class attack submarines and 1 Columbia boomer next year, or I can give you missile defense at the Ravenna Arsenal in Ohio that will protect from missiles coming over the Arctic. Which do you take and why? And we can't have both. We don't have the budget for both, Admiral. Which one do you take?
Well, I got to get the Kobayashi Maru solution going here and find a way through it. But for you Star Trek geeks out there, I love that. Look, we're not going to get 3 Virginia class, so I fault the question, and I'll just say, look, at this point, we need to do Homeland Defense. I think China, we have to prioritize it. I know my submarine brethren will be disappointed in me for saying that, but that's about 2 different threats. It also helps with North Korea. We have got to get China and Russia's missile threats under control. And Hugh, we're not ready for this. And this is another 25-year problem, which you've been talking about for most of this 25 years.
For 25 years. And it's hard. It's hard until you have a disaster, Admiral. You know, what we're seeing in California, we may do some things differently here, but it's not like it's a surprise. And when the hypersonics fall down on our heads or the terrorist attacks on Bourbon Street, not a surprise. It just isn't. 30 seconds, Admiral.
So listen, I want to introduce one more idea that you just put in my head, which is thinking back to Ronald Reagan. One of his intellectual breakthroughs back then with the Strategic Deterrence Initiative was that we would actually put weapons in space. And I think that's a decision this administration's kicked the can on. The Chinese and Russians haven't.
Good idea, Admiral. I got to run back to the next segment. Thank you. Admiral Mark Montgomery, I appreciate it. Foundation for the Defense of Democracy.